All right. Well, it is my pleasure once again to welcome you to another one of our speaker series events, Center for Latin American Studies, FIT. My name is Manuel Romanacayo. I'm the Associate Director for the Center. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Angela Alonso to PIT. She's a visiting scholar at the Harvard Hutchins Center. And she has come, in a sense, as a connecting perspective on a previous speaker series event that we had in December with Fernando Limongi. And this one is a perspective viewing from the Mosaic protest and the way in which the Brazilian case in 2013 illustrates this. And without taking any more of your time, I'll just remind you and our online audience that we have another Charlemos event on February the 26th. And on the 29th, we have a border-to-border event, the first one in a series that will be dealing with issues surrounding migration in the hemisphere. And please, Angela, take it away. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Thank you, Kayla and Zashegubi for the invitation. Thank you all for coming, especially Ray that is responsible for my book before that one.
You were responsible.
Okay. So I'm most a 19th century researcher. But when those protests emerged in Brazil as a political sociology, I was kind of put in the track of doing a research on that. So that's my explanation for this book. So when you probably will remember that in 2011, we had many protests around the world. So when the protests started in Brazil 2013, the first idea that appeared was that Brazil was just joining the club, that national protests would be a drop in a progressive wave, pushing the country in the left direction. This optimist approach was global, was not just concerned to Brazil. But I think that when looking at this global scenario, we lose the national political process that is relevant to understand how we arrived at 2013. So although this political process is important, the scholarship that dealt with the Brazilian protests did not pay much attention to it. Actually, part of the scholarship was more concerned to the things that unfold. So the next election, the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff and then the election of Bolsonaro. So the explanations were more concerned to relate 2013 protests as an orange of something else rather than to explain what really happened. And the ones that really talked about the protests used one of those four explanations, either to say the protest was a kind of rising expectations result, that people want more of in the left side, or that was a representation crisis, that the political system wasn't work for bringing the claims people are saying inside the political system. And if the other and most nowadays more widespread explanation is that the protest started as a left one, but after some time it was kind of captured by the new right. So all those approaches, they are different among themselves, but they have in common the idea that what we had seen there was a unified social movement. And that the protest was a kind of monolith. My work challenges that idea. I think that it was not one social movement, but a cycle of protest with many movements inside. So I'm trying to show that to you. And my second argument is that this cycle of protest was the outcome of a lengthy contentious political process that the scholarship did not see because they were not looking to the past or not looking to the national context. And so my main question here is to address those protests as a result of something. So my question is how we arrive at the biggest street protest in Brazil since the redemocratization in the 80s. And my answer is that the protest resulted from a long conflictive political process that started in 2003, when a left-wing government took office, the first one since the 1964 coup. So my point here is that the Work Party presidency dramatically changed the relationship between government and street politics. And reactions to the government reforms, the reforms done or just proposed, brought reactions from the two sides of the political spectrum, from the right and from the left. So to make those points, I relied on a research that consisted in gathering and protesting events in newspapers, in what my students call ethnography, that is to go to the social media and to internet and observe what's happening there, and interviews with protest leaders and authorities.
Sorry.
Is the interview.
I was looking up the documentaries and then it started.
Okay. So in the book, I pursued those arguments in a chronological fashion. I go from the 2003 to 2013 protests. But here, what I'm going to do is to highlight the analytical dimensions of my research rather than describe everything for you. So following the contentious politics approach, my departure point is that protests begin in the government, because street politics is the alternative to organize the groups that are outside the government, the ones that do not have access or influence enough. So in this sense, who protests depends on who governs. And until 2003, right or center wing parties governed. So left movements took the street. When a left party took office, the scene changed. And changed in many directions. I'd like to highlight that the Work Party brought an agenda that placed new topics in the public debate, opening conflict zones that would define the street politics subjects from then on. The other thing is that the government itself relied on a participatory rhetoric and opened many spaces to citizen participation. So the government stimulated new actors to organize it outside the parties. And Work Party included socialist movement leaders into the administration. So in doing that, the left abandoned the street politics and a void was created. And as we know, the voids never remain empty, and large fields of activism started to organize. So I'm calling fields of activism families of movements with related agenda and the same style of activism. So they started to compete for street politics, two on the left and one on the right of the government. These fields started to demonstrate in 2003 that they were small, but they would be the organizers of the 2013 protests. But it's worth to notice that social movements were not alone in the streets in 2013. As you can see here, unions, parties, entrepreneurs, and religious organizations took a role. So my point here is first, that the protest was not spontaneous, as many said. Political actors organized them. However, at that point, some actors were recognized and others were not. So the media, the scholars, and even the authorities focused on what was called this new left. And they failed to see the presence of the other actors that were in the street at that point. These movements, they were on the right side, they were there, but they were described both in the newspapers and in interviews that I did in June 2013 as non-political actors. So the left movements talked about them as weird people that they did not recognize as usual political activists. And the authorities talked about them as, and the media as well, as green, yellow families. So they were there in the streets, but they were not recognized as political actors. These green, yellow symbols, I argued, were not anti-politics. It was the opposite. It was a way to present themselves politically. It was a style of activism, a mix of aesthetic, symbolism, and organizing techniques used to call attention on themselves. So the literature paid attention to global protests that happened before 2013 as an inspiration for the Brazilian protests, but they did not pay attention to which were, in fact, the sources of symbolism that they were using at that point. That were, I believe, were demonstrations that happened before, much before that time. Why? Because to learn from other protests, to learn from other experience, it takes time. So what the protesters did at that point was to rely on styles of activism that were used before in well succeeded movements. So I believe that three of them played a role. So one was this new socialism, very much inspired on the Zapatism, that renewed the socialist activism on the left of Lula government. Since the old socialists entered the government, they need groups that went in that direction use them. The second one was the most famous at that point, the autonomists that used the global justice model, basically the anarchist symbols and targets with the addiction of the black bloc tactic that actually wasn't used since the 80s, but was new in the global scale. So this style was taken by another field of movements on the government labs, more concerned with moral issues. Although they talked about redistributive issues, their main target was sexuality. So we have those two on one side of the government, but we have those green yellow family as well on the other side. And there we have this so-called patriots. They call themselves that way. And Tea Party worked as their main model. Because Tea Party had all the claims that could put many different groups together. Less state, more religion, more weapons, and the use of national symbols. So in Brazil, nationalism was used before during the democratization process by the left movements. And this time, the other side took it. So since Lula started to govern in 2003, those three styles of activism were presented in the streets, in different protests. And I think they worked in two ways. First, for the organizers, they were a way to distinguish between different political groups in the streets. And for the supporters, the ones that were just joining the protest, they were kind of signalization of which side would you join to. But from where those joiners come from? To grow a protest requires much more than organizers, formal social movements. It requires lots of supporters. So this is a crucial class of participants for a phenomenon like that one in 2013, when we have too many people in the streets. So in 2013, I think that most of the supporters came from the civic networks, self-organized webs of citizens engaged in solving social problems. As I said before, the government incentivized them to self-organize, and two kinds of civic networks organized. One was concerned with solidarity and the communitary well-being of its members, and it was more, it was attracting more people that was concerned with cooperation, and the new socialist movements were close to this network. The other side, it was a more countercultural network with new experiences, for instance, of marriage, or with styles of life. And the autonomous movements was more connected to that one. But there was another kind of networks that grew at that time as well, that were full of entrepreneurs. Those are, they call themselves entrepreneurs. It doesn't mean that they are rich people, but they are, in Brazil, we say empreendedorismo, right? So this refers to a secular, but also an evangelical network that organized citizens in the cities, and an agro one that was responsible for the cities that were outside of the main centers and grew more in the center, west center of the country. So those networks, they were very distinctive. If you look at them in terms of the people taking part and in what they were really doing or defending. But they have in common that point that was a kind of mantra from the 90s on, that the need of empower the civil society. So they agree with that. And that rhetoric was not just a rhetoric in favor of the self-organization, but a rhetoric against the state, because the citizens should assume a role in the public life and in the places that were first occupied by the state. So civic networks were not politics, but a modality of politics that valued direct ties based on personal trust as the way to solve collective problems. And so those networks were the pot where the movements went to recruit supporters for demonstrations. Those supporters were those supporters were not individuals that were alone. They were connected among themselves. The supporters walked in the street along with the ones they trust. Yeah. They shared a lifestyle with. So they demonstrated basically with relatives and friends. So they were not an undifferentiated mass, but members of specific moral communities that believe in similar things. Those joiners had something else in common. They have almost the same social position. Social elite populated the civic networks and was overrepresented in the streets in 2013. It responded roughly for a quarter of the demonstrators. You're going to say, oh, it's not too much. But you have to consider that at that point, they were 7.8% of the population. So in the streets, they were overrepresented. And these social elite members were specifically those that were in occupations detached from the state or without dependence with the state. So they were criticizing it because they were out. So to sum up that point about the actors, I have been talking about the actors, right? So 3 fields of activism organized the protests. Each of them mobilized its own civic networks of supporters, which were coming, although different, from basically the social elite that neither trust nor depended on the state.
Can I just to clarify?
Sure.
When so these figures, they refer to members of all 3 types of movements. Okay.
So this is a national survey done during the day that was the greatest day in terms, the hugest day in terms of number, and was done in 8 capitals. So I think it's the most representative data we have collected at the point the protests occurred. So that's what I have to say about who they were. Now I'd like to talk to you about what they are shouting about. So that is just to impress you. So the claims made where many times people said, oh, too many claims, but you can organize the claims in some clusters. And we can see here that public morality, private morality, capital labor relations, public policies and land, and violence were the most important issues. However, what this image tells you is not what they were asking for, but around which subjects they were demonstrating. I say that because each cluster is occupied by antagonist movements. You cannot read the names of the movements, but if you could, you'd see that you have, for instance, in private morality, you have movements for and against same-sex marriage. So the issues here were the issues under dispute. And where did those disputes came from? As I said in the beginning, when the work party took office, the relation between institutional politics and street politics changed. This is true for the actors, but this is true for the issues as well. The clusters correspond to subjects presented in street politics since 2003, because all of them are related to policies the government had done or tried to do. So one conflict zone is around the policies for redistribution of resources and scarce social opportunities, such as higher education and affirmative action. But also around land. So Lula suffered pressure from the land movements for the redistribution of land, but also from the landlords' organizations. In those issues, in this redistribution conflict zone, the government was pushed in opposite directions. The second conflict zone was around violence. And the use of violence by the state and by the citizens. Lula proposed and lost a disarmament plebiscite. It was at that point that Bolsonaro emerged as a leader. Lula also failed in promoting a national truth commission to investigate the dictatorship crimes. So, although the government failed, movements organized around those issues at that point, around public safety and about dictatorship in different directions. And the third conflict zone is concerned to morality, to the moral orientation of collective life. In private morality, the government proposed abortion, LGBT rights expansion, and a drug law. Again, reactions for more and for less produced movements pushing the government in both sides. As for public morality, the situation is different. Lula purged a scandal, the mensalão, an accusation of systematic corruption. Movements pop up around this topic as well, but in one single direction. Left and right movements organized in the same way, asking for moralization of politics. So, I'm having my troubles with that.
Sometimes it goes slow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't.
I have to be patient. So in the Lula years, we have those three conflict zones. You are gonna see at a certain point that I have a diagram shown there.
Can't be that.
Yeah.
I should have by now.
It goes. Okay, wait. I'm fond of that slide in particular, so I'd like to show.
It's a nice one.
So in the Lula's years, the three conflict zones were opened, and movements in opposite directions emerged in all of three. However, you are going to ask, if you have everything done at that point, why huge demonstrations did not occur during Lula years? Well, first, because Lula stepped back in both the conflict zones of violence and on morality. He focused just on redistribution policies. So those conflicts kind of stayed aside. And second, because when Rousseff started her term, the game government street was much more complicated, because the three fields of activism that I mentioned to you were already organizing middle-sized protests. The civic networks had grown and were up to respond to calls to protest. And her own policies intensified redistribution and violence conflict zones. But besides Dilma, the Supreme Court and the media also played a role here. The Supreme Court, because it intensified the moral conflicts and the protests around them, while judging corruption, abortion, and same-sex marriage. By its side, the media spread a rhetoric of public moralization, insisting on corruption rather than inequality, as the government was saying, as the biggest national problem. So in 2013, everything was boiling. Organizers, supporters, and issues. So in the book, I describe what happened in June, day by day. But you can be calm, I'm not going to do that today. What I'm giving you is just an outline of the phases of the cycle of growth. So the cycle outbreak was not around public transportation. It was about morality. The first protests in June were for and against abortion, same-sex marriage, and a gay therapy bill that was proposed in Parliament. So until June 12th, there were 77 protests concentrated in the political capital, Brasilia, and in the demographic most important cities, São Paulo and Rio. But we already had at that point 45 movements alone or in alliance demonstrating. And as you can see, we have a lot of protests around redistribution, but they have few people attending. And in the other side, we have a few protests around morality, but they were full of people. So the protests, June protests, started about the moral control of boys. That was the first main protest, as you can see. That's the LGBT parade in the up, and down was evangelical protests against the LGBT's rights. So that was the beginning. And on June 13, a second phase began. The troops in Brazil had been training to avoid terrorist attacks in a global event, the Confederation Football Cup that was about to start in Brazil. So when the press called for the state to stop the small protests used of the autonomous movements were doing using black bloc tactics, not those big ones, the small ones. The police used the occasion to test in a real situations in the three most populous states, the strategies they were training for. So we know the social movement scholarship is full of works that show that repression impacts mobilization. But in this case, I would like to stress two other facts. One is the victim's social profile, because every day in Brazil, there is police brutality without raising protests. The June 13 repression, however, reached the social elite members because they were the majority of people demonstrating. And the second fact was the media attention. International coverage was ready to go because of the Confederation Cup. So the country was full of international correspondents, and the repression injured even journalists. So that made the repression globally broadcast. In the following 3 days after the repression, public legitimation to the demonstrations took place. And the activists felt called their civic networks to join massively the protests. However, massification itself, the memory we have from June 2013, just started on the 17th, along with the cup. In that day, the protests were still small and middle-sized ones. However, the media coverage produced the idea of an extraordinary event. There was coverage the whole day long on the open TV. So many scholars highlighted digital media as very important in the protest. I'd like to call your attention to the regular, the open, free media that made the event, the protest, appear as extraordinary before it became extraordinary. So those images here of the people on the Congress top, the invasion of the state legislative house and the siege of São Paulo State Police had a huge symbolic effect because it was broadcast nationally. And without finding an agenda or a leader to put all together, the press ignored most of the actors in the streets and focused on a small autonomous movement for free transportation, as if it was the lead. This interpretation proved wrong in the following days, because although São Paulo, Rio, and other 6 smaller cities canceled increases in the transportation fares, the protests grew. So the cycle peak was on June 20th, when 1 million people took the streets in all capitals. This day was described as the day the people took the street. But although the number of participants was high, Brazil is a populous country. So if you consider the whole cycle, June as a whole, the number of people on the streets, without considering that the same people went many times, so it would be around 7 to 8 million people on the streets. So it meant 5.6% of people really voting during elections. So it was not the people exactly. And it was not the people also because the other data I showed you before, because the social elite was demonstrating. And this helps to understand where protests concentrate. The cycle hit more the southeast and the south parts of the country, the richest one. So here on the map, bigger the circle, more events. So you can see, if you know the country, the relevance of the big cities. But demographic alone do not explain, because Paraná was the 6th state in inhabitants at that point, and it had 4 times more people than Bahia, that was the 4th in population. So the reason to join the protest were political. The protest was larger where opposition movements had deep roots in the local civic networks, and political opposition and judicial authorities facilitated the protests, for instance, releasing employees from their duties. So this gives, this information, I hope, give you another way to understand the non-party slogan. It was not exactly against the whole representative system they were demonstrating. It was a fierce opposition to the party. The street had a party, the anti-PG party. So, how how did the government respond? It responded based on a misleading interpretation. The president spoke twice about the protest during June and called street leaders to negotiate. But she called those leaders from one side and she framed the protest in one side because she understood them as the scholarship I showed to you in the beginning, understood it as a left protest that was just claiming for bearing political policies. So when she did that, she failed to acknowledge the protest's internal cleavages, in particular, the presence of this huge patriotic field in the streets. And the government also failed in recognizing the relevance of private morality among the issues. She said nothing. So, to conclude, my research shows that 2013 demonstrations were not initiated by a left-wing protest and then hijacked by the right. It was a cycle of protests that I'm calling mosaic because we have many different movements within 3 fields of activism demonstrating at the same time. The cycle resulted from a long-term shift in street politics. It started when the World Party took office for the first time in 2003. Each field of activism grew separately until arriving at the same time on the streets in 2013. Each one bring along their own supporters from different civic networks, asking from different and even opposite things. So there was not such a thing as a common agenda in the streets. The 3 fields disputed with the government and among themselves the direction of the country in terms of redistribution, violence, and morality. So they were disputing where the country should go. That was at stake. That's it, folks. If I have 1 minute more, I'll talk about the things that you are going to ask, but I can't do it after.
I hope we ask the right questions.
I know, yeah, now
Now I have my questions.
No, I thought you would ask about the future, so. Yeah,
I was thinking this was super interesting, and I actually have more than one, but I was, you said at the beginning that you were not interested in the interpretations of outcome. But,
It's hard not to.
I mean, it's hard not to, but even though you were showing how fragmented it is. And I was just wondering if you think even within this fragmentation, if we can consider the movement successful given what happened later, because we know already. Is this something, or it's a movement that is so diverse that couldn't be successful just because there are competing views?
should I answer now? No, thank you, it's a central question, actually. I did research, and I published before that book, years before, on what follows. So what happened after 2013? And in the book, I tell that story as well. By the end of the cycle, this patriarch field was huge, and it was visible because of those national t-shirts. And the other sides, the other two fields, they recognized it, and then started conflicts among them started to happen, physical conflicts among the different fields. And then the left sides, they left the street by then. And then I followed them. What they did, they were completely lost. They did not understand what was going on. And they decided to retreat and to do what the left usually do, right? Let's do a congress, let's do an assembly, let's discuss that issue with calm and many, well, you know how it is. And so at the time they were doing that, looking at themselves, this patriarch field was going into the internet deeply and organizing local groups where they were not rooted before, but they were already rooted in some parts. For instance, Carla Zambelli, who now is a representative, she had Facebook groups in all the capitals. So she was calling people, and she had her movement organized in all those parts. So they did not grow after. They were there and they come. But when they come as alone to protest in 2015, the left did not respond. What happened at that point was just a silence of the other side. Because I do not have the data here, but I can. I have the data. If you see in 2015, the patriarch field protest in São Paulo, Minas, in those cities that I was showing you here in my map. So it was the same phenomena, but without the left. And when the left decided finally to take the streets again, was just when Dilma Rousseff was about to be impeached. And even at that point, when we had another cycle of protests with demonstrations for and against Dilma, those two left fields, they did not defend Dilma. They went there, but they were all the time talking against the economic policies she was doing. So there was not a strong support. So we have this mosaic, then we have just the patriarch field on the streets in 2015, and we have the street divided, but with the patriarch field more organized in the Dilma's impeachment. I don't know if I answered that.
Well, in that case, was successful in there. If you see a continuity between 15 and 13,
Yeah.
and that led to the impeachment of
Yeah.
Dilma, then they probably consider themselves successful in that.
Mm.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
They were expecting, I did most of the interviews before the Bolsonaro, all of the interviews before Bolsonaro election. But they talked too much because of the electoral scene about the election that they lost when Dilma was re-elected. And so they were, all of them said they were supporting ISUNET, they were supporting the PSDB, but they lost the elections, so they had to do something else. That's, you know.
So I have a question. Oh, I'm
Sorry, I
sorry.
think it is.
Okay, so I think that the question is also about the results and the future. I think it was last year, which was like 10 years after this protest. And the memory of this protest was like, okay, this paved the way to the rise of Bolsonaro. Just, and I'd like to know, like, how do you explain this memory and how this memory somehow distorts what this cycle of protest was about?
Oh, tremendously. Your question gave me the opportunity to reframe something that I just said, answering Kayla. I don't think, and I did the research from the past to 2013, because I don't believe that we can put on 2013 all the future, you know. Actors had choices that they made after that. So there was not a determinist path, right? So I finished the book there because I don't wanna buy that explanation that Bolsonaro is a result of 2013. It was a result of many things. One of them can be the groups that organized at that point, but not just that. So I think when you look the past, considering the present, we tend to build explanations like that. And when you talk to actors and they talked about their own experience, they do the same. They have an explanation about the present and then they projected it to the past. So I did the interviews, but I just did it in the end of my research. First, I did a data set on the protests in the newspapers. And contrary to the other research, I did not departure from the idea that transportation was the issue. I went to see protests, what people and any people demonstrating. So after that, I organized this, and so I could see the main subjects and the main organizers. And I interviewed the organizers of more than 3 protests. That was the criteria. And so the interviews were the last part, when what I would like to know, I already knew what they had done on the streets, I already had seen their websites, so I had the information. What I would like to listen was how they justified their own positions, the values they have, what they believe in. So I do not rely on the facts that they told me, even because I did the first interviews I did in June itself, in the end of June. And they couldn't remember I don't know if that happened on Thursday or Tuesday, 2 weeks before. So memory is not, you are totally right, memory is not a good predictor.
So it's an online question, actually, that I wanted to read for you. And it says, thanks very much for sharing this fascinating research, Angela. I wanted to ask a question about the connections between your research, in particular between your book, The Last Abolition, and this research about the 2013 protest. What did the two have in common, and how did the work you did in the last abolition help you devise strategies for working on this contemporary research? And in what ways was morality relevant in both case studies?
This was actually my second question that I did do, is how you're a scholar of social movements in 19th century, and one of the things that I like the most about this is how you frame abolitionism as a social movement that is as fragmented as this, maybe. So if I can just follow up, if you can see any resemblance with, I don't know how to say that in English, but we've had the Revolta do Vinte in 79.
The what?
The Revolta do Vinte.
So it doesn't seem, but I always write the same book. I mean, in terms that the theoretical approach is the same. So I'm thinking for the abolitionism and for that, I'm thinking about the relationship between government and social movements, how this changes during the time, and what the actors are doing to pressure the government, and what the government is doing to answer to the pressure it receives from both sides. The difference in those cases that in the abolition case, I was just trying to make the case that there was a national social movement, that although we had many different groups, that they were going the same direction, positively, in the way that they were all asking for abolition. In that case, I'm arguing that there is not one single movement. There is this fragmentation as well, but all the movements are fragmented. But in that case, it's not just movements, because they were asking for different things. They were asking for opposite things in many cases. So for in all the issues, for instance, they were asking for more guns and for more human rights. So they were in opposite pattern. So I couldn't frame them as a single social. And that I started to talk, to research that when I was finishing my book on the abolition, and then the protest occurred, and many people asked me, well, this is a social movement, right? And well, I give the classes, what is a social movement? And I said, no, it's not. I cannot see what I see in the social movement here, but I'm not sure what it is. And so I began to investigate. But I think we have here that difference, but the concepts, the concepts I'm using are the same. And the methodology also is the same. In both cases, I look at on the newspapers, I look at for protest events without asking who were organizing them. And I defined who were the important actors looking at the events. And so then I went to see the associations. Of course, in the 19th century, I couldn't go to the websites and I couldn't do the interviews. But after defining who were the groups that were most important, I also went to investigate deeply those associations. And then I worked with the biography of the main leaders. So that is but I like most of the other book. Yes.
Hi, Angela, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the narrative that were produced over these movements. I was there during the first days. I don't remember how memory is problematic. And I remember that I was on the left side, also thinking about the policies regarding education and health and everything. But I felt in the place that I was in Paulista, in São Paulo, that started the presence of people that were not for the
The
same.
weird people.
No, but the no party, because there's someone with PSTU, some left
Yeah.
Yeah.
flags, and there were some groups, no party, and we started like to feel that there was something that was not a whole one thing. The discourse that we were talking about that the media produced it began like for the public transportation, and then it gathered some other problems and in society, and then it went to the right side, to the patriots. So why do you think that these media produce these discourses? Because it's really deep inside, I think, the common sense. And also you think that in the beginning, like this mosaic, these differences, all these different groups, they gathered in different times, in different moments of the June. In the beginning, it was more linked to the left, and after we started to also regarding these different groups. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, the media, I think we can have two different answers for that. One is that they were not doing their job properly. Because they were not reporting everything in the street, right? And I think that is related to the fact that most of the people that are studying or doing the coverage of protests are in favor of protests. So they have a positive view. And so they went there to look for people asking for better things. And most of I have been fighting with my students all the time, because of course they go there to find that as well. But when you go deeply in social mobilization, you see that people are not so well, intention as that, even when they are in the progressive side, and that everybody can organize. The difference in that case, to talk in favor of the media now, is that media had a framework as the scholars to talk about protests in Brazil that came since the redemocratization, that the left was demonstrating on the street. So they were expecting the left demonstration. And that time, other people were in the street. But if we take the long run, in the 60s in Brazil, we had the same kind of phenomena with demonstrations in both sides, for and against, when we had a left government. The same situation during João Goulart. So I think the media was unable to see that. But also going back to the question about morality, I think the media had a part to play. The media was also looking at those demonstrations as if they were the same that had happened in Europe. And at that point, the interpretation was that those quick interpretations, right? That those, like the Arab Springs and things like that, that we know where those things ended, right? So they were seeing a kind of wave of left things, as if those things were like virals, right? That they go by the air. The people were seeing someone demonstrate for one reason, and so they do the same. And I think media assumed that point, and the media also had the mainstream media had a very bad image of the work party government. And many of the people that were writing newspapers or in the mainstream media, they were doing all the time criticisms on the government. So I think they they had this editorial line as well, saying that those guys are against the government because the government is corrupt. And so, but just a quick thing about your own experience. Every time I present, someone says, "Oh, well, I was there. I wasn't there." I when I look at that, I said, "This is not good," and so I didn't go. And
I was like, oh.
yeah, and after the experience that people to come back to the question before, the experience people have is that experience I showed to you before, is to be with the friends, to be with the people that are like you. So where you were surrounded by people that were almost like you. So mostly people say, I went there and I just saw the left, or I just saw the right when they came against us. But when I did the interviews with those guys from the right, they say the same thing. They say, we were there all the time, and all of a sudden they came with the black bloc tactics and those party standards, and we put down. We did it. We put down because the protest was ours, not them. So you have this dispute because all the actors, they have their different points of view of what's going on.
I have a question. I mean, this is really interesting, and I don't like to make. I mean, I like the fact that you kind of take away from this global protest and stuff, but there is. I mean, I am puzzled by maybe to make. How can you say more about this? Was the left like? Did they give up? They tried and failed to find a response, or they were just like having blinders that they couldn't see what was happening, or because this is, I mean, the reason I said with the global stuff, because this is a puzzling thing in the sense that in country after country, what you see in the 2010s and is like a rise of popular right, like electorally and on the streets, and a complete inability of the left to respond to that. Both on the streets and electoral. So I agree with you, and what we know that happened after was that the right. I mean, all the discussion about redistribution disappeared.
Exactly.
Right, and they owned the agenda and became corruption, and then we know. So anyway, if you could say more about.
When you see the history, the recent history of those movements around the world, there is a kind of similar path, because we had a left that is kind of lost, and in two senses, because socialist utopia disappeared as a goal, concrete goal. And because the new generation, as this new socialist, they are not talking the same language of the old leaders. So you have a gap that they did not transmit that experience. For instance, those guys, they did not live during the dictatorship. So they did not have that experience. They did not fear the right. Now they are in that, So when they saw a left government, what they thought was that they should be doing more. They did the same with Obama here, So in many countries, when the left governments were trying to do things, they were pressured by the left as well. But I think there's another change, that's the fact that these new autonomous movements, they started to focus on morality issues rather than inequality. So their agenda is mainly concerned with customs, how to live, right? In terms of the use of her body, the style of life and everything else. And that it has a powerful capacity of mobilize one side, the new generation, progressive ways, but also it goes directly on the most, I'm as a sociologist consider, the most important issue in one society. There is the reproduction, the biological reproduction. So when you go for those issues, the reaction is enormous. So we have been seeing that around the world, that people are organizing in terms that it was not reactionary. They were defending a way of life that they believe should be lived in that century, against abortion, against sex marriage, and so on and so forth, against drug. And so we see in here. So I think the left is kind of trapped in that, you know?
We're left.
Yes.
So I apologize for coming in so late, for one, but I was really interested in this talk because I study social movements myself.
Oh.
But I wanted to ask about just kind of protests and movements in general in Brazil. So someone who was there, not in 2013, but in 2021, was my 2022, sorry, was my grandmother. She went back to Brazil to take care of her father, who was 92 years old, and he was getting kidney surgery. And while she was there, she went to what she did not, she's hadn't been in Brazil in 40 years, and she's not very politically aware. So she went to this rally and was waving Brazilian flags, and she's like, oh, it's so patriotic and wonderful and happy. And she shared the video on WhatsApp. And I saw the video, and it was a Bolsonaro rally. And it was a very intense, very, very nationalistic, very, very political rally. And she had no idea what was going on the entire time. Not politically aware at all, probably hasn't voted in a Brazilian election ever. I wanted to ask, because of the communal nature of the kind of Brazilian culture, the idea of kind of solidarity with people around you, especially because you grew up in the favelas, if there's sort of just an attraction, these sorts of events amongst regular, ordinary, apolitical individuals, just because they think of it as kind of being a gathering of people, a gathering of one's community in any way, or is that just something that happened in this one particular instance?
I don't know if you have arrived at when I showed that that data here. I think people did not gather as individuals. They were there as groups of people, as community. They were connected. And when you saw the other thing interesting to see is when you look city by city, the capitals in particular, we have most, if you look at São Paulo, for instance, that's my city, most people in the streets were from the social elite. So, and they were there participating in a civic sense, but they were together with friends, and many people said, well, I went there and I met someone from my college years or something like that. So because it was the same kind of people that were there.
Sorry, and this is not always the case. I mean, when I go to a demonstration in Rio, my city, I don't go to meet people, but I never go alone. Yeah. And I always meet people. Yeah. So isn't this sort of like always not just
yes. But the thesis here was that people went spontaneously alone to join. Oh, no. So I'm making the case that they were not.
Because I mean, what I was thinking, I mean, it's related. So my last experience going anywhere for that in Brazil was in the Direta Já. I think one of the I mean, I'm old. I know the difference is that at that point, I mean, I was in São Paulo then. There was 1 million people in the Anhangabaú. It was incredible, and I felt like we're all the same, right? Because everybody there is for one thing.
Yeah.
In these cases, you don't have that. So exactly. The importance of going with, creating your own space in the, I mean, I wonder if there must be some relationship. I mean, there was some other movement you mentioned in the talk, I forgot, that had a one goal. You know, it's easier to bring people together, right? If you have, you know, everybody.
Yeah, the impeachment for the
Oh,
Collor
yeah.
impeachment, it was the
Yeah.
same thing, yeah. And the question you made before, the success of 2015 was also because of that. They decided, the main part of the movement, they decided to focus on the impeachment. So rather than go, because they have many different goals and they couldn't arrive to a common point, because some of them were really authoritarian movements, and others were liberal, and others were conservative. So you have the whole plethora of movements in that patriotic field. And so when they put that target that was a negative one, they could put everybody together in 2015.
So just jumping on about this importance of going to protest in groups. I remember because I was there in São Paulo in 2013, in the protest. And when the protest became massive, if you could go just one part of protest, it would be about one thing. And then if you walk around a little bit, something about another thing. And then so it was something really crazy. Because it was like, oh my God, so it was like multiple protests that was happening at the same time, on the same street. I remember like it was like at Largo da Batata, one of the protests started there. And then because I had hard time to find my friends, so I had to walk around to several protests at the same time. So that was the point, how diverse it was. And I'd like just to ask you about the left, because one of the interpretations that emphasized, for example, the leadership of MPL, which was the autonomous group that she was talking about, what was in the leadership of the protests in São Paulo. One of the interpretations was there's a very famous essay in which they talked about that the tactics that were deployed by MPL intentionally had they go to one act to not allow that the transport fare would rise, but at the same time, when the protest became massive, they would lose control over the protest. I'd like to know your thoughts about that.
That they planned that, you're saying?
Yeah, no, not that they planned that, but the kind of tactics that they employed, it was something around that. And just another question, just going to Rio de Janeiro, where I believe at the same time happened the murder of Amarildo de Souza.
It was after.
It was after.
Yeah.
But what was the goal of that event and race in that process?
Okay. I didn't show that data begin for the end, but most of the demonstrators were white. So that's another, because I didn't show that data because I do not have them for all the capitals as the 20 capitals are, but the cities that IBGE asked, mostly white people appeared in the street. So that says something about the elite that was there. As for the NPL data, when I started the investigation because when I'm finishing a book, I have to start another thing because otherwise I never finish it. So I was finishing that book and the protest started and I said, well, what is going on? And I saw that my students were among the leaders of the protest. So I went to talk to them. Who is organizing? So let me, and at that point I did, I think, 12 interviews. And I interviewed just the left side because I just talked to the left side. But I didn't bring today, but I have a cognitive map that the answers they gave to me when I was asking about who are there. And so they didn't answer precisely. So I did that kind of teacher thing, right? after I put that thing that's cognitive math, that's chic. But I put a line like here, said, well, here is the government. Who was in one side, who was in the other side? And so they could talk about their side very precisely. They described many movements here, even very small. And when they talked for the other side, they said things like, which Brazilian will know, bombadinhos, the people who go to the academy pumped. And people who look like Luciano Huck was the guy that was in a show on TV. So they did not have the words to describe the people that were there, but they recognized that they were there. So you have this MPL, they knew that they were not alone. They knew that they were not the leaders. But all those autonomous movements, they had that strategy of using the black bloc tactic. And the legitimation that they have that, well, the state and the capitalism, they are not going to change by regular elections and things like that. So what we have to do is go to direct action in the level of the problems. We go to use violence because violence is going to come back as a boomerang, and the media will broadcast, and we will have full attention of society for problems that otherwise we wouldn't talk about. So they were doing that, but they were doing that for years, right? For years. So I don't believe they were important, and I think they understood that at a certain point.
Patricinhos e Mauricinhos.
Mauricinhos.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Please. Just want to remind you, next week we have another speaker series events. It's with Flavio Limositi, and he will be talking about the US in the 20th century from a Brazilian perspective. And then he's got a pop-up course that weekend as well on Jewish migration to Latin America and Brazil in particular. And I hope that you can join us for both. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.